This is Terry Wager. The date is May 20th, 2014. I had to check on my computer to see what the date was. The time is 8:12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I have been a victim of a very large and sick-ass murder conspiracy, of which the Multnomah County sheriffs and their buddies and their girlfriends and their relatives have started. I was victimized by sting operations done by the Multnomah County sheriffs ever since I was 5, 6 years old. Ever since. In 1970, 1971, around that time frame, I was about 5, 6 years old. Around that time frame, was my introduction to the Dunham family, who happened to live 2 houses away from me. And the mother of that family was taking her children out for a walk, and she went over to my mother's house, and she was asking my mother if she could take me along with her. She was asking my mother if it was okay if she could take me along with the rest of them for their walk. Well, my mother agreed, so I went with the Dunham family. This was really my first introduction to them. I didn't really know who they were. My mother seemed to know who they were, somewhat. She knew there were the neighbors that are 2 houses away from us. And the Dunham family took me a block away, and they were involved in a sting operation with the Multnomah County sheriffs. And they were helping the Multnomah County sheriff to set up a neighbor that lived a block away from us. And they were setting up that neighbor as a pedophile. And there was a county sheriff there at this place. The person that was being framed, he was not there. He was either at work, or I'm going to have to assume he was already, I'll have to assume he's either at work or he's already arrested and sitting in jail. One or the other. Because the owner of the place, of that house, was not there. The county sheriff officer was, in uniform. And he was inside that person's house, a block away from our home. And the Dunham family brought me and their children to that house. And the county sheriff officer, in uniform, was in that house. And he was tossing out candy bars out a damn window. And the mother of the Dunham family was telling me and her children to go across the street and to play in that yard where that house was and to pick up the candy bars that the person that was tossing them out the window, she was telling us to pick up those candy bars. Now, I was only 5, 6 years old. I had no idea what the fuck's going on. And I did what I was told to do. Not understanding what the fuck's going on at all. And while me and the Dunham's family's children were picking up all those damn ass candy bars that the county sheriff officer in uniform was tossing out the window, the mother of the Dunham family was across the street with a big ass honking metal camera, and she was taking photogenic photos of this. And when they were done, the mother called us back across the street, and we began heading back to my home. She was taking me home after this. And on the walk home, the Dunham family, the mother and her children, they were all laughing about what just happened. They're celebrating. Now, I was in a good mood because I didn't know what the fuck's going on. I didn't know they're framing somebody. But I had a bunch of free candy bars, so I was happy. But I had no idea they were framing somebody. And they were talking about they were celebrating, and they were talking about having a pizza party after that. And I noticed that the mother of these children was getting all that on photogenic photo. Now, I was only 5, 6 years old. I didn't know what the fuck's going on. So, silly me, I'm sitting here asking if I can have a photo, one of the photos, because I knew she was taking photos of us. So I asked her if I could have a photo, and she told me no, she can't. She was stuffing the photos in an envelope, in a yellow envelope. And she had a very interesting camera. It was a very large metal camera, County Sheriff green. I'd never seen a camera like that before. Now, mind you, this is 1970, 1971. There is no digital anything back in those days. And yes, most cameras back in those days were metal. Well, this was a very big-ass camera. It's the kind of camera you would see like in a 1950s Hollywood movie where you see detectives taking photos of a dead body at a crime scene. It has the big spout thing going upwards where there's a flash bulb that goes in there, that kind of a thing. Those kind of cameras that you would see in an old 1950s, 1960s movie where they're taking photos of a crime scene or something. That's what the fucking camera looked like. It was a big-ass honking camera. And it was County Sheriff green. And it had an emblem on it. I didn't recognize the emblem. I was only 5, 6 years old. I didn't know what the fuck it was. But I seen that county sheriff officer in his uniform. I didn't even know he was a county sheriff officer. I was only 5, 6 years old. I had no fucking clue. None. I didn't know what the hell a county sheriff officer was. I didn't know what the hell a firefighter was, for God's sakes. I was only 5, 6 years old. I had no idea. But I never forgot that very weird day. And it was my introduction to the Dunham family. And my family, me and my family, became targeted by these very people after this event. Because shortly after this occurred, the mother of the Dunham family came back to my mother's, and came back to my home a few days later and was asking her if she could take me with her children to the movie theaters. So the Dunham family and the county sheriff took a great deal of interest in me and my family right after I witnessed them framing a neighbor who lived a block away as a pedo. Now, keep in mind, I was too young at the time to understand what the fuck was going on. I had no idea they were framing a neighbor at the time. And I had no idea they were targeting me and my family. I was just too damn young to understand what the fuck was going on. And because I didn't realize they were framing somebody, I didn't say anything about what they did to my mother or to my father, because I didn't realize they were committing a crime. I had no freaking idea. Like I said, I never forgot what happened, The reason why, it was a very weird day, and it was my introduction to the Dunham family, who happened to become a huge part of our lives from that point forward. They took a great deal of interest in me and my family from that point forward. So the Dunham family, the mother of the Dunham family and her children, began taking me about on average of once a week. As best as I can recollect, it was on average of once a week, to the movie theaters and to watch a movie. And they insisted on sitting in the very same seats each and every time at the theater. They would make sure they'd get there early so that they could have the very back row and have the very same seats over and over and over again. And they were taking me to see movies that were not appropriate for me to watch, considering my age at the time. They were taking me to spring break type movies that had boob scenes, and they were taking me to movies that were like horror movies that had sex scenes in the damn stuff. And I was just too fucking young. I was just too young to understand what the fuck was going on. I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I didn't know why they were taking me to movies like this. I was too young to ask questions. I didn't understand what the fuck was going on. And after several movies like this that they took me to, you know, my mother would, after they take me home, my mother would say, well, how was the movie? What could I say? I would just say something like, oh, fine, you know, whether I liked it or not, you know, because I didn't know what else to say. I was only a little kid. I didn't know. I didn't know they're fucking setting us up. After several times of this crap, then the Dunham family invites my mother to come along. So we go to the movie theaters, sit in the very same theater, in the very same seats. This time my mother's along with us. And we watch Disney movies. So the Dunham family was trying to conceal this from my mother, and they knew damn well I was just too young to understand what the fuck was going on. Now, I didn't realize at the time that I witnessed them framing a neighbor as a pedo. I didn't realize that. What did they concentrate after I witnessed the Dunhams and the county sheriff framing a neighbor as a pedo? What did they concentrate on? They concentrated on me and my mother. Their attentions went directed towards me and my mother. They were taking me to a theater where we sit in the same fucking seats each and every fucking time. They were very particular about that. And they're very fond of using photogenic photos to frame people. Now, I recall, every time we went to the theater, I recall somebody standing in an aisle and snapping a photo. And, of course, it would happen when I'm not looking at them. So I didn't see if they were taking a photo of me or if they were taking a photo of somebody else. I didn't know. You know, I was too young. I didn't understand. I didn't realize I was being set up. You know, being an adult and being aware of what they did, you know, as an adult, and not forgetting all this, not forgetting any of this shit. You know, I can look back at it now and see how blatant and obvious it was. But, you know, I was just too young. I didn't know. I had no fucking clue. Well, after they staged some shit bringing me to bad movies, after this, they invited my mother to come along, and then we're watching Disney movies in the very same theater, sitting in the very same seats. How interesting, because the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunhams are very fond of using photogenic photos and doubles. They're very fond of that. Gee, I wonder why they framed a neighbor that lives a block away as a pedophile using a double and then photogenic photos, and then they take great interest in me and my family after I witness them do this. After they went through this this phase where they're taking me to movie theaters, and then they're taking me and my mother to movie theaters, then they just stopped doing that entirely. And then their children, the Dunham's children, focused on my older brother. They started palling around and befriending my older brother after this. So they were systematically targeting everybody in my family. And I had the information to know that I had the information that they were setting people up and targeting people. But I was so damn young at the time, I didn't realize that's what they were doing. I didn't realize it. I had no fucking clue. So after they literally went through the process of framing a neighbor, they concentrated on me and my mother. They staged some shit. And remember, they're fond of their photogenic photo use and their double use. They're very fond of that. And I witnessed that. I can testify to it. I can describe in great detail how they were doing it. Because I never forgot it. It was one of those weird days you never forget. And it was my introduction to our nearby neighbors that became a huge part of our lives from that point forward. They were palling around with my older brother after this. So in other words, they were done with me, they were done with my mother, so then they concentrated on my older brother. And they were getting him into trouble, all kinds of trouble. The kinds of trouble that was destroying his name and reputation behind. And we didn't know this was happening. Neighbors didn't tell us this was happening. But the Dunham's family's children was hanging out with my older brother. They were getting him into all kinds of trouble. And my brother was getting blamed for everything that they were doing. My brother at the time was like 11, 12, I think. Around that time, around that age group. He was like 5 years older than me. Okay? So he's not even a teenager yet. He's not even a teenager yet. My brother was partially retarded. He had brain damage when he was first born. So, he was a very nice guy, a very likable guy, a very innocent guy, and a very naive guy. He was much more naive for a kid his age than most kids would be because of this. And the Dunham family focused heavily on him after they staged this shit with me and my mother. They were methodically taking their time, systematically setting up everybody in my family and targeting everybody in my family. They were literally destroying my brother's name and reputation behind his back. They planted stolen property on our property. And they tried to hide stolen property on our property. And the police, when I found that property, I told my father about it, and he called 911 to report it. And the police showed up, and my father is surrendering this stolen property that we found on our property. And, we're cooperating with the police and everything. And the fucking police officer was smirking at my father and implying to my father's face that my brother might have done it. We knew damn fucking full well he did it. Now, we didn't understand at the time that we were being targeted. I didn't understand at the time we were being targeted. I didn't realize I did not realize that I caught the county fucking sheriffs and the Dunham family framing a neighbor as a pedo, and they were using a double in photogenic photos, and it was a county sheriff officer in uniform that was acting as the double. He just had his damn arm hanging out the window, and he's just tossing candy bars. The rest of him he kept not visible because he's just acting as a double. He had his sleeve rolled up, and he's just tossing out candy bars. So the only thing that shows up on Mrs. Dunham's camera that she used to take photogenic photos was of the county sheriff's officer's arm. That's it. That's it. The rest of him was not visible. That's why he's acting as a double. He was deliberately acting as a double of the person that lived there. And the Dunham family, who is not in law enforcement, was fucking helping the county sheriff to do this. Well, they targeted me, they targeted my family right after this. From that point forward, me and my family were targeted. And I was just too damn young to know what the fuck was going on. And after they staged this shit at the theater with me and my mother, after they staged that crap, they focused on my brother. They saw him as the weakest link in our family because he was partially retarded, and therefore he's old enough that he's old enough to where they could frame him for crimes. And that's what they concentrated on. They literally planted stolen property on our property. And when we found it, we called the police to report it and just hand it over to them. And the police deliberately, intentionally, the police officer, the Portland, I use that word loosely, the Portland police officer was smirking when he fucking implied to my father's face that my brother might have done it. My brother was only fucking 11, 12 years old. He was partially retarded. I knew my brother very freaking well. He was no freaking criminal. But he was palling around with the fucking Dunhams, and the Dunhams worked for the Portland police and county sheriffs, and they fucking used doubles and photogenic photos to frame people. This is fucking sport to law enforcement in Oregon. In Portland, Oregon, this is sport to these motherfuckers. It's fucking sport. They specifically target people. They pick people to target, and then they all just work together at setting that person up. And they destroy their target's name and reputation. This is what they did to that neighbor that lived a block away. They were labeling that person as a pedophile from that point forward. But they were trying to hide that from me and my family. They were trying to hide the fact from me and my family that they were calling that dude that lived a block away a pedophile. But they were saying this to everybody else. They're trying to hide it from me and my family because I witnessed them using a county sheriff officer as a double. And I witnessed them using freaking fucking photogenic photos. Doubles and photogenic use by the Portland police and the Multnomah County sheriffs and by their civilian bros and girlfriends and their relatives is common practice. And they grin about it. They smirk about it. They laugh about it. And every time they fucking frame somebody, they fucking go out and celebrate. They celebrate. It's party time as far as they're concerned. It's fun for them to do this shit to people. And they're always on the lookout for somebody to target. They targeted me and my family, not because we did anything wrong and they think we deserve to be punished in some way or another. They targeted me and my family because I witnessed the son of a bitches using a double in photogenic photos to frame a neighbor. That's why. It's sport to these fucking people. And they methodically, they took their time setting me and my mother up after that. Now, they never actually formally charged us with anything, but I'm pretty damn sure they probably destroyed my reputation and my mother's reputation back then, too. They're very fond of rumor spreading and making false accusations about people behind their back while they look you in the face and they pretend to be your friend. They pretend to be your neighbor and friend, but behind your back, they're fucking slandering. They slander the living crap out of their victims. And they do it behind their victims' back, so their victims can't defend against it and can't protect against it. And they use the same tactics over and over and over again. It boils down to them creating events, staging events, committing acts, various acts, usually involving a crime or implying a crime. And then these people are the ones that commit the acts, the crimes. And they do it in such a way where they're creating evidence of the crime. They commit the crime, they create the evidence of the crime, and then they give their target the blame. My family became destroyed by this sting operation of theirs, if that's what you want to call it. As far as I'm concerned, technically speaking, it's a sting operation. Police already admit to sting operations. Sheriffs already admit to sting operations. And anytime police recruit civilians into an operation where they're putting on any form of a pretense, it's usually referred to as a sting operation. So technically it's a sting operation. But the reality of the matter is, it's the sting operatives themselves that are the criminals and staging the crimes and committing the crimes. And they'll plant evidence and they'll stage events, and they rely very heavily on photo doubles and photogenic photos. And that, combined with the fact that they rely on their buddies and girlfriends and relatives that are not in law enforcement, but are connected to law enforcement to back up their bullshit. And they use these tactics over and over and over. I mean, when Mrs. Dunham of the Dunham family was taking me to the theater and watching bad movies, she wasn't the slightest bit worried about being prosecuted. She was concentrating on making me and my mother look bad because guess what? They use doubles. And they use photogenic photos. So they just frame their targets for whatever they want. When she took me to the movie theaters, she was taking me to see bad movies like spring break movies that had nude scenes, and horror movies that had sex scenes and crap like this in it. I was too young to understand what the fuck's going on. I was too young to even ask questions about what the fuck's going on. I didn't understand. I didn't realize that we were being set up. And she insisted each and every time that we had to be in the very back, the very, very, very back of the theater, and we had to have the very, very same seats. There was a particular time when we got there, and there were people that were sitting in the seats that the mother of the Dunham family specifically wanted. And she asked one of her kids to take me to the bathroom. So me and another kid went to the bathroom, and when we got back, she had convinced those people to move so that she could have those specific seats. And now you wonder how could I, at 5, 6, 7 years old, how could I remember all this shit? Think about it. How weird is that? Any and every encounter I ever had with the Dunhams during this time frame in the early 70s was weird. It was unusual. They were acting weird. They were doing weird things that made no sense to me. Mrs. Dunham was adamant about having the same freaking seats each and every time. And each time we went there, she insisted on there being an empty seat in between me and her. Every time she would use that empty seat In other words, she would tell me, okay, I have this seat, and then she would sit 2 seats away from me. Her son would sit 3 seats away from me. So I'm basically sitting by myself with an empty seat in between us. And then she would just use that empty seat in between to put the coats and, or to set popcorn down on or something like that. She would use it like a table. Now, I was too young to understand what was going on, but it was weird. It's like you said. It's like I said. That she insisted each and every time to have the same seats. Now, guess what? When they invited my mother to come along, we went to watch a Disney movie. But guess what? She had to have the same seats. The same seats. And they went through a little bit of a process to make damn sure that me and the Dunham family would have the same seats. And my mother got to have the seat that was next to me that was usually used as a table to set stuff on. So they had this, it was methodical and planned out. Now, of course, my mother wouldn't suspect a thing because she never went along with all, she never went during all these trips. I was noticing the oddness of it, but it's like I was too young to ask my mother about it. I didn't know. I'm just a little kid at the time. I didn't have the common sense to recognize how methodical it was enough to bring it up to my mother or to my father. But it's like everything they did was weird. And because of it, I never forgot it. That horror movie she took me to traumatized the hell out of me. It was the first time I ever seen a really nasty, awful, god-awful horror movie. And the Spring Break movie that they took me to, that was just like non-stop boob scenes, pretty much. Pretty much right at the very beginning of the movie, too. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was, it basically started out with some, it was a Spring Break movie, and it started out with some, women on a beach, and they were laying down in the sand like on a towel or something, and a dog runs by and grabs the bikini top that one of the women had undone, and the woman is chasing it after the dog that's running away with the bikini top. It's supposed to be a comical scene, what you would basically refer to as an R-rated type movie. Of course, back in 70, 71, there is no R ratings for movies. But this, I don't remember the name of the movie, but that's how it started out. That's how the movie started out. It was a Spring Break type of a movie. And I can't remember what the hell the name of it is. But this is the type of movies they were taking me to when, after they framed a neighbor that lived a block away from us as a pedo. This is the type of movies they were taking me to. And after they did this several times, then they invited my mother to come along, and then we're watching Disney movies. I can't remember the name of the Disney movie. It had, Tim Conway and something Knox. The guy that's on that Andy Griffin show. I can't remember his freaking name. It was a cowboy movie, sort of like a cowboy / mining movie. I can't remember what the hell it was called, but it had Tim Conway and something Knox. I can't remember, but it was a Disney movie. I enjoyed that movie. I was a little kid back then. But that was the movie they took my mother along for us to watch. And after all this shit, after them staging all that crap, That's when they concentrated on my brother. And they was getting my brother into all kinds of trouble. And they were blaming him for all kinds of shit. And this is when we started noticing that somebody was planning stolen property on our yard. And when we found the stolen property, I'm the one that found it. It was in our yard, and I told my father about it. And he went out to look at it, and he said, "Yeah, this don't belong here." It was some kind of a stereo system that was just sitting in our freaking yard. So my dad called the police to report it, and the police came to pick it up and to take the report. I'll tell you right now, the police did not take my father's report. That stupid fucking cop didn't give a rat's ass about my father's opinion or my opinion. He didn't even question me at all, and I'm the one that found it in the yard. He didn't even question me about it, and he wasn't even taking my father's word on anything, and he was kind of implying that my brother might have done it. My brother was 11, 12 years old at the time. He's partially retarded. Jesus Christ. Now, I didn't have the sense back then to know that the Dunham family was targeting us and setting us up, and that they have buddies/relatives in law enforcement. I didn't know that. I didn't realize they framed neighbors. I didn't realize that at the time, even though I witnessed it and never forgot it and can describe in great detail how they do it. But I never realized it at the time because I was too damn young. So I know damn well that cop that picked up that supposedly stolen stereo system that the Dunhams planted on our property so that they could set my brother up for shit. Because they were done with me and my mother from that point forward. They were concentrating on my brother. So they were setting him up for that kind of crap. And then they were labeling him as a stalker behind our back. And they were scaring the neighbors and telling the neighbors all kinds of bad things about my brother, and we're trying to hide it from me and my family. So during this time frame, when they're palling around with my brother, they were destroying his name and reputation behind our backs. But to our faces, they're pretending to be our friends and neighbors. Behind our backs, they're destroying our names and reputations. So law enforcement and their buddies and their girlfriends and their relatives have a very long, a very nasty history of targeting people and setting people up. And they're very fond of staging and committing the crimes themselves, and then they use doubles and photogenic photos to give the blame to their targets. Now, I don't know what happened to that neighbor that was being framed as a pedo that lived a block away from me. I have no idea who that person was. I was only 5, 6 years old at the time, and I don't think I watched news back then. I don't think I was keeping track of news, so I know nothing about it. My father, he worked full time back then. I don't think he had much time for news back then. And my mother, she was never fond of news, so I would imagine I have no recollection of her ever watching news. She watched soaps. She watched soap operas. She watched Perry Mason and TV shows like that, in the afternoons, I think. And maybe this is before and game shows. She didn't watch the news. She hated the news. So we knew nothing about it. We never heard anything about it. My brother and my father eventually ended up becoming poisoned at a certain point. And I have no idea how it happened, and I have no idea who's responsible. However, I do know at the time it occurred, it was around the same time. They were both poisoned around the same time. And I was about 8 years old at the time, 7, 8 years old. And my brother was being gang stalked in the neighborhood. His name and reputation was completely destroyed, and by this time I already knew about it. Because I'm hearing about it from other people. And I was even hearing about it from the Dunhams. But they weren't being, to my face, the Dunhams were not accusing my brother of anything. To my face, the Dunhams were saying other people are saying he did this and he did that. The entire time it was the Dunhams staging it all. The entire fucking time. And they were trying to hide it from me. They took advantage of my ignorance. They took advantage of my family's ignorance. They're sting operatives. They pal around people in law enforcement. They're trained sting operatives. They know how to methodically set people up. And they take their time at it. And when they target people, they target the whole family. And they try to get close to those people they target. They want to get close, so they befriend their targets so that they can be close to their targets, so that they can testify against their targets. Now, I was in the dark about a lot of this stuff. When my brother and father were being terrorized and gang stalked, and when they were poisoned, I didn't realize they were poisoned. They didn't tell me they were. My brother described the symptoms he was suffering, but he didn't even know he was poisoned, and I didn't even know either. But he told me the symptoms he suffered. He described the symptoms he was having. Now, back then, when I was 7, 8 years old, I had no idea what the fuck was wrong. As an adult, as a mature, intelligent adult, I know damn fucking full well they poisoned my brother. He was about 13, 14 years old back then. They poisoned him. And they poisoned my father. He went to the hospital. And they covered it up at the fucking hospital. They refused to take a toxicology test. And they named off all his health problems. They tried to pretend it was a heart attack. And they pretended, he had emphysema and stuff like that. And yes, he did. He had emphysema. And they tried to say, well, he had a heart attack. That was what's wrong. He was poisoned. If he had a heart attack, then the heart attack was triggered by freaking poison. Poison triggers heart attacks. Duh. But guess what? A fascist fucking country, a fascist goddamn police force, and a fascist county sheriffs and their fascist buddies at hospitals, they cover up poisonings by simply refusing to take toxicology tests, and they just ignore the symptoms of poisoning, and they'll recognize everything else but the symptoms of poisoning. And from this point forward, my brother in our neighborhood was being labeled a stalker. He was being labeled a rapist. He was being labeled all kinds of shit, and he was being gang stalked by multiple people in law enforcement and multiple people connected to the Dunham family. They treat it like it's a fucking sport. They're like sharks that are circling their prey that's already bleeding, and they're toying with it. That's basically how they treat it. When they gang stalk people, when law enforcement and their buddies and their girlfriends and their relatives stalk somebody, it's a sport to them, and they treat it that way. And they stage crimes, and they'll commit crimes, and they'll fake crimes. They'll have their female relatives, cops or county sheriff officers will have their female relatives pretend to be victims just so that they could back up complaints against their target. And then they laugh and brag and celebrate after they're done successfully framing somebody. They'll go out and have a pizza party. That's what the Dunhams did every time they fucking framed somebody. They had a pizza party. Every freaking time. They destroyed my family's name and reputation behind our backs. We didn't even know what the fuck's going on. And you know what? It really literally took me years to figure out that they destroyed our names and reputation. They were labeling my father as mentally ill from that point forward to discredit him as a witness. The Dunhams, to my face, even said he was mentally ill from that point forward. So they didn't care from that point forward if I knew that they were labeling him that way. It's like they're done with us now. They're on to new targets now. So they just didn't care. They weren't trying to hide that. My brother became institutionalized, not because he did anything wrong. He was institutionalized because he was being gang-stalked by the Portland Police and the Multnomah County Sheriffs and by the Dunhams and by anybody else that's buddies and girlfriends and relatives to people in law enforcement. He was being heavily gang-stalked, and they were committing and staging crimes and giving him the blame for it. And he was being heavily stalked, and every time he left our home, he was being stalked and harassed and terrorized, even beat up. My father was in the hospital because he was poisoned. My father was disabled from that point forward. He couldn't get a job. He had no way to get a job because he was too disabled. And after my brother was, they institutionalized him because they were giving him blame for all kinds of shit that these gang stalkers were, for their, because they were making such a ruckus over my brother that, they used the multiple complaint excuse as their excuse of institutionalizing him. They didn't want to give him a trial. He never had a trial for anything. He never did anything wrong. He was telling me as best as he could what they did to him. And it wasn't easy for him to communicate. He had brain damage. He's partially retarded. It's not easy for him to communicate. And when they poisoned him, he didn't even know he was poisoned. And I was too damn young to understand what he was telling me. Gang stalkers are sting operatives. They're people in law enforcement. They're not some brand new federal agency that just recently came into freaking existence. They're your goddamn local government, the people in your fucking local government. Your local police, your local firefighters, your local paramedics, your local county sheriffs. And anybody and everybody that they pal around with. Those are the gang stalkers. And they don't fear prosecution at all. They never fear prosecution. If you call 911 and try to report on these people, you're immediately labeled as mentally ill. And they'll treat you that way. They treat people that way. Anybody that tries to charge a cop, or a cop's girlfriend, or a cop's buddy, or a cop's relative gets labeled mentally ill. Law enforcement, your local government, does not recognize complaints on sting operations. And gang stalking is sting operations. And it's run and organized by your local government. Your local pieces of shit that run your government. And it's sport to them. And when they have a target, when they have themselves a target, they go all out on that target. And it's virtually impossible for their targets to find help Because for one, nobody in law enforcement will take a complaint. And two, your fascist news media and your fascist Hollywood has gone to a lot of trouble to give people the impression that there is no such thing as criminal conspiracy anymore. Your government's not organized and targets people. Ignore the fact that your police are so organized that they operate sting operations and that they recruit civilians into it. Ignore that. Ignore that. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to think of law enforcement that way. They want you to think of law enforcement as there to give people a helping hand. They want you to ignore the fact that multiple people in law enforcement are organized and will stage and commit crimes in order to frame and entrap people, and that they recruit civilians into it. They want you to ignore that. Your Hollywood and your TV news stations want you so much to ignore that. You know why? Because that's what your gang stalking is. They don't want you to know your government's organized. They don't want you to know they target people for sport. They don't want you to know that they kill for sport. They don't give a fuck. They don't care. Local authorities is no different. Local authorities of this day and age are no different than the KKK of the 1920s. No different. They're the same thing. Literally. They're organized. They're uniformed. When they target people as a gang, and they slander the living crap out of their targets so that the community won't complain when they murder that target. That's what the KKK did in the 1920s when they lynched people. And they did that on a regular basis. And they got away with it on a regular basis. And the news media of the day portrayed their actions as justified and as justice and shit like that. And the communities in the 1920s were never in an uproar over it. You know why? You know why? Because they were getting away with it the same way that your local police and your local county sheriffs of 2014 get away with it. They slander the living crap out of anybody they want dead. They slander the living shit out of anybody they're targeting. And that's why the KKK was getting away with that shit in the 1920s. The only reason the KKK disappeared, is because of World War II. Literally. Because of World War II, everybody had a distaste for fascism, thankfully. So the fascist government, our fascist, USA fascist government, decided they're going to try to hide and conceal its fascism and be more covert in their operations. So the police officers and the county sheriff officers and their buddies and their girlfriends and their relatives took off their white hoods, their white robes, but they never stopped targeting people. They never stopped murdering people. They never stopped framing people. They've always been organized. They've always lied for one another. They've always operated in that manner. Your news media just doesn't tell you about it. These people do this to people for sport. In the 1920s, it was sport to the KKK to set people up, and then they would lynch people. They would label some poor black guy they had it out for back then as a rapist, and then they would lynch that person without a trial. Well, nowadays, they don't label people as rapists and then lynch them. What they do nowadays is they label people as pedophiles, and then they just either poison them off or they murder them in a fake shootout. In other words, they'll pretend that the person's armed, and then they shoot the person. And then they fake justification over the news. Either way, they don't get a trial. And either way, they get labeled guilty without a trial. Either way. And it's literally the same type of people using the same type of tactics. Calling people a rapist in 2014 doesn't have the same effect it had in the 1920s. You call somebody a rapist in the 1920s, they would be lynched without a trial. Well, to say that in 2014, that don't get people lynched, okay? But calling people a pedophile in 2014, guess fucking what? Guess what? That gets anybody killed. And that's why law enforcement pedophiles people they want dead. Anybody that cops want dead, they pedophile. They slander the living crap out of their target. They'll stage crimes using doubles and photogenic photos, and they'll even recruit their civilian buddies and girlfriends and civilian relatives into helping them by having them back up bullshit crap on their target. And after they literally slander the living crap out of their target, they usually kill that target. That person never gets a trial. And this goes on all the time in 2014. And law enforcement even enlists the aid of schools in helping them to pedify people. Anybody a county sheriff officer wants dead, they call up the schools and tell them to print flyers calling somebody a pedo. And they'll give the description of their target. They won't bother mentioning that their target's already surrounded by over a dozen sting operatives that are renting apartments around that target and that they're setting them up. They won't tell you that. Police officers and county sheriff officers, they don't want people to know that they surround their target using sting operatives and that they stage crimes by dressing up as doubles so that they can impersonate their target. And then they just fake a crime and then they give their target the blame. They basically vilify their target so that the community won't be in an uproar when law enforcement murders that person. Instead, the community will just accept it and not complain. Well, these are the same tactics the KKK used in the 1920s. So it's nothing fucking new. Now, when I was 5, 6 years old, I had no fucking clue about this world. I didn't know what the fuck a county sheriff officer was. I didn't know what sting operatives were. I had no freaking clue. But I had no idea what the hell a pedophile was. I had no fucking clue. No idea. No freaking clue. But I witnessed a Multnomah County Sheriff officer in uniform acting as a double of somebody in their house. And he was tossing out candy bars to the Dunham's family. And it was the Dunham's family that arranged to get children there. And the mother of the Dunham's family was telling the children specifically to go across the street and to play in that yard and to pick up the candy bars that the man throws out. And while they did that, the mother was getting it all photogenic. When they're done, they laughed about it, they bragged about it, and they were celebrating big time. And they were talking about heading to Pizza Hut for a pizza party. The Dunham's family was using a camera owned by the Multnomah County Sheriffs. It had the Multnomah County Sheriff's emblem on it. I was too young to recognize it as such, but I never forgot what that emblem looks like. As when I got older, I realized who that uniformed person was. It was Multnomah County Sheriff officer. And the emblem I seen on that camera was a Multnomah County Sheriff's emblem that they used back then. That camera was County Sheriff Green. And Mrs. Dunham admitted to my face when I asked if I could hold the camera When I asked her if I could see the camera, she told me she can't let me have it because she borrowed it. So she's admitting it's not her camera. This is right after they framed a neighbor as a pedo. And she was stuffing the photogenic photos she took into a yellow envelope.